Welcome to APUSH, where 500 years of history collide with a school year that never feels long enough. Whether you're a seasoned veteran with 20 years of experience, or you're new to the course because your principal told you you're teaching APUSH an hour ago, you're in the right place. When I first started teaching APUSH back in 2009, I remember thinking, how am I supposed to cover everything with all the school events, activities, and constant interruptions? I spent hours hitting the books just trying to stay ahead with submitting lesson plans, grading, and responding to emails. Hopefully, with this video, you won't have to. If this is your first year, take a deep breath. You're going to do great. I'm going to walk you through exam details as well as practical strategies to plan and pace your course, a survival guide if you will, and share a few shortcuts I wish I'd known that will help you support your students and enjoy the school year. Let's talk about the APUSH exam itself, the structure, timing, and how it's scored. The exam is broken into two main sections. Section 1 is multiple choice, followed by 3 short answer questions. Section 2 is free response, the essays. First, the multiple choice. Students will answer 55 questions, stimulus-based, in 55 minutes, about a minute per question. Usually these questions are grouped in sets of 3 or 4, and each set is built around a source, like a political cartoon, a speech, an excerpt, a map, or a chart. This is why primary sources are so important in APUSH. Students have to interpret them, not just memorize facts. Because they get 55 minutes for this section, if you're teaching APUSH in 50-minute class periods, the math obviously doesn't add up to a full-length section. But in class, running through 20 to 25 questions at a time works just fine for practice and pacing. This part makes up 40% of the exam score. Next, the short answer questions, or the SAQs. These often play to students' strengths. There are 3 questions total with 3 tasks, A, B, C, and students have 40 minutes to complete all 3. They're concise, very structured, and they don't require a full essay and are worth 20% of the overall exam score. Question 1 features 2 secondary sources. Students must interpret 2 historians' perspectives on a historical event, such as civil rights or the Vietnam War. This one can be tricky. Make sure your course includes regular practice with secondary sources to help students build confidence. A fun way to introduce this concept is to get students arguing over non-historical examples, like, is a hot dog a sandwich, or would you rather be a wizard or a Jedi? That one's dumb. It's always a Jedi. SAQ number 2 features a primary source such as a letter, a speech, or an image students will have to interpret and explain. SAQ 3 allows students to choose between a question from early in the course or something very recent. Most go with the early material since A, teachers just reviewed colonialism, and B, some teachers barely get to period 9. Finally, short answers are great for quizzes and prompts because they are relatively easy to score and pass back. Next, the document-based question, or the DBQ, which is kind of the main course of the exam. Despite teenage public opinion, the DBQ is really not that bad. After all, the one question gives students the clues they need right there in the 7 provided documents. Students have 60 minutes total, including a 15-minute reading period. The DBQ is skill heavy, and because of the skill required, it's worth 25% of the total exam score. So it's a big deal. You'll definitely want to practice this one frequently. That said, giving a full-length DBQ is time-consuming, especially in a 45 or 50-minute class. One good goal, give a full DBQ in the fall and one in the spring. You can always take a standard DBQ and remove a few documents to make a mini DBQ. Focus on targeted practice, like thesis writing, document analysis, and sourcing. UWorld has DBQs for units 3 through 8 complete with rubrics and sample essays. Finally, the long essay question, or LEQ. Students choose one out of 3 prompts, usually one from the 18th, 19th, or 20th centuries. They'll have 40 minutes to write, and it does require prior knowledge of the concept to answer. This one question makes up 15% of the total exam score. The LEQ uses the same core skills as the DBQ, crafting a thesis, using evidence, and applying historical reasoning, but with no documents. That means students have to recall their own knowledge, rather than rely on sources, but the thinking process is the same. Oh, and one more thing. Remind your APUSHers to never stop writing or typing. AP readers have to read everything, so make them earn their pay. Write, or rather type, as much as you can until your hand falls off. It'll grow back. Readers can't award points for what they don't write. Let's go back to the multiple choice for a second. All of the questions are stimulus-based, meaning they're paired with things like maps, historical images, excerpts from primary and secondary sources, political cartoons, which are best introduced during the Jacksonian period because before that the speech bubbles are so tiny, and finally, charts. Stimulus-based questions aren't gotcha questions like, what happened in 1789? Instead, students are being asked to analyze, interpret, and apply historical thinking skills to a given source. The key skills tested here are causation, comparison, and continuity and change over time. A few quick tips. Teach students to read the stimulus for context, not just to hunt for an answer. Often, two choices can be tossed out quickly. Maybe they're from the wrong time period or clearly unrelated to the prompt. For example, in this stimulus, we have all sorts of clues that speak to what is happening during the late 1960s when President Johnson gave this address. Option B is outside the time frame regarding the easing of tensions with the Soviets, mostly in the Nixon years of the 1970s, so détente is out. Option D, nativism. This is domestic anti-immigrant sentiment. Nothing here about immigration policy in the stimulus. Now we're down to two answer choices that are opposites. One describes the United States stepping back from world affairs, and the other reflects an aggressive foreign policy aimed at confronting communism, which aligns perfectly with our stimulus. Speaking of primary sources, if you don't know where to start, check out the course and exam description or the CED. It lists out primary sources for each topic, even down to the paragraph. Most multiple choice questions use short passages, so a 150-word selection for class is ideal. Finally, changing answers is usually not a great strategy. AP kids are smart, but they tend to overthink questions. Often when students go back and second-guess themselves, they end up changing a correct answer to a wrong one. For every one answer changed from wrong to right, there are probably 5 that get changed from right to wrong. Try this. Tell students to give themselves 3 opportunities to change their answers so they can prioritize if they really need a second look. Now, let's look at scoring trends and exam updates. In 2024, about 72% of students earned a 3 or higher on the APUSH exam, a big jump from previous years when the pass rate hovered closer to 50 or 55%. That increase is largely due to scoring recalibrations that began in 2022, where college boards shifted from panel-based scoring to a data-driven model. So instead of relying solely on expert judgment, they're now applying statistical benchmarks based on student performance at scale, or something. Look, we're history people, not numbers people. Bottom line, the exam format hasn't changed. Same question types, same timing, same skills. But the way it's scored has, and that means more students are walking away with credit-eligible scores, which is great. But keep in mind, a 3 is passing, yes, but a 5 is exceptional. Not all colleges treat AP scores the same. Top 20 and Ivy League schools often only grant credit for a 4 or 5, and in many cases only for a 5. State schools and public universities are generally more flexible. Many will give credit for a 3. For example, the University of Oklahoma and Texas A&M will give a student with a 3 6 hours of credit. Think about that. The average course is averaging around $400 per credit hour. The AP exam fee is around $90, so a student just saved over $2,000. Add a couple more passing scores, and you're looking at enough hours to enroll as a sophomore instead of a freshman. However, some colleges may accept the score, but still require students to take the same course again. That said, if a student has already made it through APUSH once, they'll most likely breeze through the college version and feel way more confident doing it. Now let's talk about some practical strategies for your APUSH year. Think of teaching APUSH like climbing a mountain. There are 2 types of climbers. Technical climbers who follow a fixed route with ropes and ladders with a path someone already laid down. and alpine climbers who know their destination, the summit, but are flexible on how they climb. Those are APUSH teachers. We forge our own path. We're all unique and do things differently. Some lecture and tell stories, some assign projects or lead class discussions, and some stick closely to the textbook. But we all have the same destination, the AP exam. But how you get there may look different each year, or even from one class period to the next. It doesn't matter how you teach as long as your students are engaged and learning. So build in flexibility. If you want to flip a topic quickly so you can spend extra time running a simulation on the Great Depression, great! Swap it out with the UWorld video and study guide to move more efficiently to another topic. Remember, no plan is perfect. You will inevitably lose days to field trips, orchestra concerts, and unexpected interruptions. Build those into your plan. And yes, you will get sick. Your kids will get sick. Your real kids. You'll feel behind and the need to catch up. Start from the exam day and work backwards. Build yourself 2 weeks of review and cut into that time to make up lost time. Or if you want to get ahead, commit to teaching all of period 1 and 9 in one day. Veteran teachers might remember the old APUSH exam. It was fact-heavy and predictable. That changed in 2015, and in our opinion, that's great news. The modern APUSH exam focuses on making arguments, historical reasoning, and making connections across time. That actually frees you up quite a bit. You don't have to teach every single detail. When in doubt, consult the course and exam description or the CED to guide your priorities and teach by topic. Lots of facts don't yield lots of learning. The overall goal of APUSH is to build deep thinkers, not good memorizers. Back in the 1900s, my APUSH teacher had us read the whole book, but who has time for that anymore? Doorstops, APUSH textbooks, have a place, but they are not the heart of the course. Most of them are well over 1,000 pages and will cover material that simply won't be on the exam. Instead, lean on primary sources, speeches, letters, diaries, political cartoons, and photographs. The AP exam is built on historical documents, so get them into your students' hands early. Let them hear Sojourner Truth's voice. Let them analyze Lincoln's words. Let them debate Andrew Jackson's legacy using Jackson's own messages. When students engage directly with the voices of the past, they'll build deeper understanding and stronger arguments. Don't let the textbook speak for history. Let the people and your students speak for themselves. When you do need a secondary source, UWorld study guides cover each topic succinctly but clearly with no fluff. It's hard to know how much time to spend on each topic. There's so much content to cover. If you're on 45-minute class periods, here's the pacing that could work for you. Shoot Lincoln by winter break, then reconstruct the Union in January. Get rich with the Gilded Age and progressives in February, start an empire in March, crash the stock market by spring break, and leave plenty of time for period 8, often a student favorite. This plan gives you space to go deeper in periods 3 through 8, which make up the bulk of the exam. Don't be afraid to move quickly through periods 1 and 9 if needed. A great strategy is to start with the exam day in May and work backwards and give yourself 2 weeks to review, knowing that you will eat into that due to unforeseeable interruptions in life. If you are still in period 5 by the new year, that's okay. The exam emphasizes periods 3 through 8, which is 80% of test content. Periods 1, 2, and 9 are important, but you can streamline them. Let's look at a couple ways you could structure your units around the CED. Oh, and don't forget, lecture is not a dirty word. Not every lesson needs a simulation, a jigsaw, or Socratic seminar. If you have to stand and deliver a lecture, go for it. Now, let's look at the specifics and jump into a potential APUSH pacing guide for the fall with the goal of finishing Unit 5 by winter break so we can start Unit 6 fresh in January. No plan is perfect, and obviously every district is different, but here's a structure that could work for you. If you already have a master pacing guide, even better, feel free to keep using that. Units 1 and 2 will be lightning fast. We can always review these later. 2 days for Unit 1, 2 days for Unit 2, because together they make up only about 10 to 14% of the AP exam, and most students have already had some exposure to that material. During these units, we can introduce basic short answer and long essay question skills. For the heavy hitters, Units 3, 4, and 5, we're balancing them evenly at about 20 instructional days each. This means the American Revolution through Reconstruction each get the same depth of instruction. This strategy matches their equal AP exam weight. In Unit 3, we can introduce DBQ practice using the French and Indian War. Unit 4 will feature the first full-length DBQ, and Unit 5 will wrap up with an MCQ exam and 2 SAQs. The last few days in December will be a catch-up and skill review buffer, so we're protected against calendar interruptions like fall break, Thanksgiving week, and the reality that kids are crazy in December. Now let's look at the spring. We are going to budget plenty of time for Units 6, 7, and 8 with a quick run through Unit 9. This pacing keeps skill practice balanced across the year. By the time we reach May, students will have practiced every skill multiple times under timed conditions, setting them up for success on the APUSH exam. Sometimes, teachers find that giving an entire unit-specific exam that spans Units 3 through 8 ends up being way too much content for one assessment. And that's totally fair. It is a lot. In that case, remember that the CED actually provides some natural breaks that make it easier to split up content into more manageable chunks, even within a unit. Here are some of the breaks I found most helpful when I taught APUSH. In Unit 3, I would teach topics 3.3 to 3.9 together. This takes you from 1754 through 1789, covering the French and Indian War through the ratification of the Constitution. Then I'd move into 3.10 through 4.4, which I treated as a second chunk. That section covers America on the world stage, the early presidencies, and the Monroe Doctrine, so it's focused on major political and international developments during the early republic. Next, we cover Unit 4, which is heavy on themes. We pick up with the market revolution and cover the political, social, cultural, and economic developments from 3.11 through the rest of Unit 4. Things like religious reform, women's roles, and growing regional identities. All right, now we're moving into the next stretch of the course, Unit 5. This unit has a clear narrative structure students grasp well: expansion, sectional conflict, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. Because of that, students usually follow it pretty well chronologically. Now for Unit 6. This one can be a struggle for students. Oftentimes, American history is taught through a straightforward narrative in a line. The Gilded Age does not fit any template. Students often struggle with the Gilded Age because, unlike Unit 5, it's not driven by a single narrative. It's an overlapping thematic unit, and everything is happening at once. Encouraging students to think in layers rather than a straight line can really help them make sense of it all. So as you teach Unit 6, remind students to think of that unit as a layer cake, full of major developments like westward expansion, the rise of big business and industrial capitalism, the labor movement, immigration and urbanization, and reforms like the settlement house movement. Whew. They're all happening simultaneously. A good break for an assessment could be after 6.7 and labor unions, and then pivot to immigration and the urban scene in Unit 6. Now we're at Unit 7, and at this point in the year, we've clearly passed the halfway mark. This unit can be chunked into 2 parts. By now, your students probably feel comfortable with your teaching style and routines, which means you can move through the content in a way that's more flexible and thematically coherent. Here's one structure that could work for you. Group topics 7.2 through 7.6 together. That includes both imperial expansion and the progressive era. And here's why. These aren't 2 separate stories. In many ways, they're 2 sides of the same coin. Progressives were trying to bring order to a chaotic and unstable economic and social system at home. At the same time, many U.S. leaders were trying to bring order to a chaotic international system through imperialism, and eventually Woodrow Wilson's vision for global peace with the League of Nations. Next up is the second half of Unit 7, and here we can shift back into a more narrative teaching format. This part of the unit picks up in the 1920s, and it flows well chronologically through the economic boom and cultural shifts of the 1920s, the Great Depression, the New Deal, and finally, World War II. This tends to keep students engaged because the momentum is strong. If you're coming up on spring break, consider picking up the New Deal once you return. Now we've hit Unit 8, and in my opinion, the main course, and honestly, one of the reasons I loved teaching APUSH. Students usually come in with some prior knowledge, and there are multiple through lines that connect directly to the present. But just like the jungles of Vietnam, it's easy to get bogged down. Here's a strategy to keep a clear, linear progression while still hitting the big themes. Start with topic 8.2, the early Cold War. Move through containment, NATO, Korea, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. This keeps the foreign policy thread coherent before you shift. Pause the Cold War storyline and hold off on détente and Nixon for later. This prevents overlapping domestic and foreign stories from getting messy. Backtrack and cover topics 8.3 to 8.9, starting with early civil rights, the Second Red Scare, suburban America and consumer culture, LBJ's Great Society, and finally Vietnam escalation through 1968. This method builds to a climax. Students see the turning point clearly, and you're set up for the 1970 shifts next. This is the perfect time for a DBQ. The topics are rich, and there are plenty of released prompts. UWorld has plenty of prompts which are not publicly available, which prevents cheating. Have students self-score using the rubric and assign themselves the grade they believe they earned. You save grading time, and they will love you for it. Plus, it's a confidence boost right before the exam. Okay, here we go. The final push through Unit 8 and into 9. Now it's time to hit topics 8.10 through 8.14, such as urban civil rights, the expansion of the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the environmental movement, and finally détente and Nixon's foreign policy. You've made it to the finish line, Unit 9. By now, time is tight, so here's how to keep it focused. Think of Unit 9 in terms of the 4 C's. 1. The Cold War, the end of it, and America's role as the lone superpower. 2. Christian conservatism, the rise of the religious right and its influence on politics. 3. The Culture War, debates over gender, race, rights, and identity from the 1980s forward. And 4. Cuts, reductions in taxes and government spending that define conservative economic policy. If you have just a day or two for Unit 9, these 4 C's give students the essential themes, the language the College Board likes to see, and just enough content to handle the occasional multiple choice or short answer question about the modern era. So how do you cover this much material? Well, things get left out, such as military history and battles. Well, at least not the tactics and strategies of battle. I know. I could spend a whole week breaking down D-Day, Operation Overlord, and the liberation of Europe. Military history is fascinating, but it won't be covered on the exam. So save that World War I trench warfare paper fight simulation for after the exam. But if your students are really interested in a topic, point them toward a great book or documentary instead. And what about presidents? With all due respect to Millard Fillmore and Franklin Pierce, not all presidents matter. In fact, the course and exam description, CED, only explicitly mentions 7 by name: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Lyndon B. Johnson, and finally, Ronald Reagan. When presidents are discussed, it's usually under the broader political, social, and economic developments associated with their administrations, such as FDR's New Deal or Reagan's economic policies. Additionally, today's APUSH exam places a greater emphasis on social and cultural history than the old fact-heavy version ever did. So even though Theodore Roosevelt getting shot in the chest during a campaign stop and finishing the speech is an amazing story, it's interesting but not testable. Teddy's eccentricities could fill an entire semester, but it's great to discuss, but maybe not essential. But what is essential is Theodore Roosevelt's agenda. But don't let that stop you from sharing interesting anecdotes that could engage students and can illustrate a point and make history real, even if it won't show up on the exam. Not every lesson has to get your students standing on desks proclaiming, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." Focus on high-yield, low-prep activities that build skills and keep momentum. For example, maybe Wednesdays are skill days, and Fridays are for connecting APUSH content to current events. Students love routine. They also need space to talk. But let's be honest, sometimes getting them to open up in class feels impossible. Try this. Put students in groups of 3 or 4 so they can get comfortable talking with each other before being called on. Or post 4 or 5 names on the board before class so those students know they'll be speaking. It takes away the element of surprise and builds confidence. And don't be afraid of silence either. Lean into the awkwardness. You don't have to do all the heavy lifting. There's simply too much content in APUSH to carry it all on your own. Let students grapple with the ideas, make the connections, and wrestle with history out loud. Don't wait until before winter break to assign your first essay. You don't need to wait until mid-year to introduce writing skills. Here's a timeline that could work for you. Period 1, start with short answer questions, SAQs, with the ACE method, answer, cite, and explain. These questions are relatively straightforward and can build student confidence. Period 2, teach long essay thesis writing and argumentation. Great prompts include questions about the role of geography in the settlement of the English colonies, such as comparing the Chesapeake colonies with Massachusetts Bay. Then finally, in period 3, French and Indian War, break out the DBQ and break some hearts. Grading your first round of DBQs can be rough. Mine sat in the car for a week before I worked up the courage. Here's a lifesaver: blind scoring. Have students write their ID numbers, not names, on their essays. Then use peer scoring. It gives them experience with the rubric and saves you time. And don't kid yourself, you're not grading those DBQs over Thanksgiving break. We both know it. Aim to get essays back in students' hands within a week, 2 at most. Score a few a day and move on. Grading 10 DBQs is way less intimidating than facing 100 in one day. Create a shorthand for your feedback. For example, ATQ could mean answer the question. LL could mean, hey, you're laundry listing facts, not explaining. Your codes can be anything, as long as students know what they mean. Here's a DBQ hack. Have students highlight their thesis, outside evidence, and document usage each in different colors. By the time you sit down to grade on a Sunday night, most of the work is already done. And if you can, take a class period to walk your students through scoring a DBQ together. By the time your students write their second full-length DBQ, it will take you way less time to score. There are tons of APUSH resources out there. You don't have to build your empire from scratch. Find trusted mentors. Join the APUSHers Facebook group. Just be sure to use the search bar before you post and follow their guidelines. Chances are, if you have a question, 100 people have already asked it. And just like teachers, students have access to pretty much everything. Let's be real, no exam is truly secure. The reality is that most students aren't scouring the internet for every old DBQ prompt. But if they are they cheating? Or just incredibly motivated researchers? I don't know, I'm torn. It feels wrong, but also kind of impressive. Check out UWorld's practice exams. They come with ready-to-go rubrics and annotated sample responses that aren't floating around the web. Okay, final thoughts. Live your life. This class shouldn't consume your students, and it shouldn't consume you. Okay, it will consume your students, but not you. You're going to make mistakes just like your students, so give yourself grace. There's no perfect way to teach APUSH, but there are strategies that make it manageable and even joyful. Trust yourself, trust your students, and lean on the APUSH community. See you at the summit in May.